night the Dalkar came, Hyrens Tale. The Endless Barrel was like most bars that inhabited the nation of Cosmore, a land trapped in time, protected from the march of progress and enlightenment by the nearly impassable Giant Run Mountains, a mountain chain that separated Cosmore from the rest of Chandara. While the rest of the continent was recovering and rebuilding from the demon wars, Cosmore was simply fighting for survival. The demons had laid claim to those lands early in their invasion, and now they are home to the Tieflings. A Tiefling is a child that is born with demonic or devilish blood. This can happen when people suffer a demonic curse on their family that can cause children to be born with ties to Bok Nor or Helheim, home of the demonic realms. It can also arise from a devil's contract. People will make a deal with some devils to gain wealth and power. The cost of these deals are usually the souls of those involved, and as such, their descendants bear the mark of such dealings by being born as Tieflings. The final way this can happen is from the union of a mortal and a demon or devil. Most of the time, these unions include a great deal of deception on the devil or demon's part, but some people enter these unions willingly as a way to increase their power. The bar was dimly lit and a haze of smoke filled the room. The patrons were mostly human, with a few tieflings, half-elves, and the occasional halfling making up the landscape of the room. The Endless Barrel was located in the city of Kalazar on the north side of Demon's Blood Lake. Sitting in the back corner at a small circular table was a pale, blue-skinned humanoid with short, white hair. In a land where tieflings were commonplace, his appearance was not out of the ordinary, but to those that happened to know what his race was, it was rather remarkable to find one of his kind here. He was one of the Batar, a people that called the wilderness home. They live in seclusion and hide themselves away with ancient primal magics. He wore a green shirt with black pants which were of high quality at one point, but had been worn down by time and use. They were serviceable, but anyone willing to take note would see the clothing's owner was probably in a poor financial state at present. His boots were in much better condition, and a strange curved sword hung on his hip on his left side while a dagger was sheathed on the right. Both weapons were cleaned and polished, yet worn, a sign to a cautious observer that he knew how to use them.
Here you go, sir.
A half-elf serving girl said as she set the drink down in front of the Batar. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment as she took in his rather comely features.
Sir?
She half-asked and repeated as he had shown no signs that he had heard her the first time. His face looked lost, deep in his own thoughts. She reached out her hand and gently touched his shoulder. But as she did, the heavy oak door at the front of the bar swung open quickly. A flash of light followed by the deafening boom of thunder quickly permeated the bar, informing all of the patrons that the storm everyone had been talking about had finally arrived. Loose papers flew from nearby tables as two human men walked in through the entryway, their thick, dark cloaks soaked by the downpour that had recently started. As the girl turned her attention back to the Batar, she startled. The thoughtful look on his face had been replaced by one of fear. No, it was not fear. It was terror. He was half standing with his dagger now in one hand, and his sword half raised in his other. She gasped without intending to, bringing his attention from the door back to her. He looked at the half-elf whose hands were now covering her mouth in an attempt to stifle the clearly unintended noise. His features softened, even though his body was in an extremely heightened state of alert.
Your drink, sir.
She said it barely more than a whisper, nodding to the glass of bright green liquid. He placed his sword back on his belt and pushed his dagger back into its sheath while he sat back, down, all in one fluid motion. He looked over to the half-elf girl. Her soft, cream-colored skin was almost pale. Her clothes were clean and clearly designed to show off her seemingly flawless figure. She wore skin-tight pants with a loose, flowing top which hinted it might reveal its contents, yet never seems to actually come through on its offer. Her head was tilted down, her gaze focused on the stone floor. He imagined it was a natural stance for her, as dictated by what was most likely a lifetime of servitude. Half-elves were a common slave race in Cosmore, and while slavery was not legal in much of Kalador, Cosmore was no such place. "Thank you," he replied. His voice was strong and confident, yet there was a hint of a melodic undertone. "Please, sit a moment." He gestured to the opposite chair, pushing it out with his foot from under the table. She glanced around nervously, worried if her owner would catch her not working. "Don't worry. I promise nothing bad will happen to you. At least not while I'm here," he commented, sensing her hesitation. She moved to the chair, sitting quickly. He was commanding, but not in an impressive way, and she paused for a moment to wonder what would cause such a person to look so fearful just seconds ago.
I'm just a serving girl, sir. I don't offer any other services.
She replied as if she had said it 1,000 times before. His heart sank at her reply. He hated slavery and all that came with it. "What's your name?" he asked in soothing tones.
Shyrissa.
She replied meekly, looking away from him. "Shyrissa, you are far more than just a serving girl. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You are what you choose to be." She looked at him and wanted to roll her eyes, but his conviction caused her to pause. Lightning flashed, she could see it through the windows, and he winced. Reaching over, he took her hands into his own. 6 years ago, in the Whispering Mountains, my village prospered. We mined mana crystals to trade with the elves, and my family did quite well. One night, a storm came in. No ordinary storm. I can still feel it. Something primal was in the air that night. It was unlike any storm I had ever seen. The wind howled, but not only that, it also carried with it shards of ice. No one could even go outside, and I remember thinking this couldn't last too long, but by the 3rd day, my thoughts had turned to how we would survive as our food supplies were starting to get low. Nothing like this had ever happened, and we were not prepared at all. Shyrissa was starting to see why the storm outside had him so on edge. But that was the least of our concerns, so it would seem. At the end of the 3rd day, the doll car came. He paused and looked out the window, as if just speaking the name of the creatures could somehow summon them. We thought they were only legend, myths to scare children and caution against exploring too far into the unknown. I remember hearing that roar, and at first I thought it was a trick of the wind. However, I started to realize there was more to that hellish noise. The wall of our house burst inward as one of the creatures barreled through it like it were straw. He looked into Sharissa's glassy eyes. She was enraptured by his story, and he wasn't even sure if she was remembering to draw breath. "Forgive me," he said. "You don't know what a doll car is, do you?" She shook her head no, not even trying to speak. They are a massive, almost 10-foot tall Yeti-like creature. They're covered in thick white fur, except their chests, which are bare. Their heads have these large, curved, ram-like horns, and their mouths are filled with sharp teeth. They have 4 hulking arms that end in savage claws that could easily tear a man asunder. He paused to take a drink. I remember my father yelling at me to get to my sister and run.
Get your sister.
He tried
Get
to
out
stall
of
the
here.
beast with his magic as I ran to my sister's room. She was hiding under her bed. She was only 9. The lightning flashed again, and the thunder rolled, causing him to jump slightly in his seat. I grabbed her and started to run to the front door, but stopped when I saw the monster. Its white fur soaked red with the blood of my father. My sister was unable to move or make a sound. She was petrified. The beast was looking right at us. There was a bright flash of light as a bolt of magical lightning streaked through the house, hitting the monstrosity, knocking it into the wall. My mother stood there with her hand outstretched, just having cast the spell. She yelled at me to run and get my sister out. And with that, she ran out of the house as a creature scrambled after her. I could hear her yelling at it, encouraging it to follow her.
Over here!
I never saw her again. I ran, Shyrissa, holding my sister in front of me with her arms and legs wrapped around me. I ran. I don't remember how long we were in the storm, or how long I walked. Days, maybe. I do remember when the sun first came out. I was covered in hundreds of tiny cuts from the ice fangs, the name I later learned for the shards of ice the wind carried. I fell to my knees in the snow, and I knew it was the end. I tried to pull my sister from me. She didn't make it. Her now frozen form hung from me like a macabre tabard. She saved my life. My sister was lost so that I might live. I laid down in the snow and closed my eyes. I was numb and was simply waiting for death to take me. But I woke up in a bed in an elven village. One of their scouts had found me. Tears streamed down Shyrissa's face. The sound of thunder broke the momentary silence, and she jumped, grimacing involuntarily. He continued. For weeks, I just wanted to die. My family was gone, my friends, everything. I learned I was the only survivor that night. 87 people died, and I was the only one who made it. He paused and then looked into Shyrissa's tear-filled eyes. Don't give up, and don't accept this fate, he whispered. She could hear his words clearly and understood they were meant as much for him as they were for her. Hyren, a voice interrupted, and Shyrissa looked over to see a tiefling standing over them. His face had numerous small scars from cuts, his skin was dark red, and he had piercing yellow eyes. A ring of small horns grew from his head, quite normal for his race. Dressing in thick, dark clothing, concealing light armor underneath, he announced, I found us a job, but we have to hurry. We need to get it done before the storm passes. Shyrissa looked over Hyren's face, and she could see the dread. His friend here must not know about the tale he had just told her. She stood up, looking at the tiefling.
Sorry, friend.
She smiled, a seductive smile that cut straight through the tiefling's businesslike demeanor.
He's busy tonight.
She purred. She grabbed Hyren's hand and pulled him up.
I have a room in the back.
She whispered into his ear.
You don't need to go out there, not if you don't want to.
She pulled him in the direction of her room and felt no resistance as he allowed himself to be led. She briefly thought of what her owner would do to her if he found her missing from her duties, but she knew Hyren would still be with her, and smiled to herself. No harm would come to her while he was with her. She knew that much was true, and if she could spare him from going out into the storm and reliving some of that horrible memory, then she would happily accept whatever fate the gods laid out for her.